Week 1 is a wrap. We're previewing week 2 all week here on SEC Unfiltered. And joining me to talk some of the big Heisman contenders and many more who could have their stock rise or fall following week 2 is the host of Locked On SEC. It's Gordy. Chris, good afternoon to you, man. How are you today?
Yeah, man, it's we're into the thick of it now. We got NFL starting up, week 2 of college football. It is this is what we waited all year for. So good to be here.
You better tell the wives and girlfriends that they're going to have to be solo for a little while because we'll be on the couch watching football majority of the weekend. So,
well, tell DirecTV to get off their behinds and let's get this ESPN thing figured out too. I got the old school antenna set up on my TVs this weekend.
I switched to streaming services not too long ago, so I don't have to worry about any of that. Thank the Lord. So. Let's talk week 2, man. I know a lot of guys showed out last week. Diego Pavia, Carson Beck, both taking home SEC Player of the Week last week after their performances. Who was the biggest performer that you saw from the SEC in the big games? I know everybody looks at statistical wise and they say, well, what about Jackson Dart? He threw for almost 500 yards in the game. Well, yeah, that's impressive, but it's against the Furman Paladins. Can he do that on a consistent basis? And the thing about it is that he can't. And what Carson Beck did after the slow start against Clemson, and especially in the second half when they turned the dial up big time and they went on an offensive onslaught and proved themselves why they're the best team in all of college football right now. And Vandy's surprise, of course, last week. Who was your guy that really stood out to you apart from some of those games, and who really could catapult their way into potentially being a Heisman contender at the end of the year?
Well, I mean, the easy one was Carson Beck and what he did, obviously, in the second half against Clemson. And I think they're going to get better as the year goes along. And he's going to be, it shocked me if Carson Beck's not in New York and as a Heisman finalist at the end of the year. But just kind of some of the other guys, we talk about Jackson Dart. Yeah, okay, it was Furman, but we forget, you got to put up the stats in the big games, and you got to put up the stats against the crappy opponents too. I mean, Jaden Daniels last year put up some big numbers in their crappier non-conference games. Joe Burrow did it, back in 2019. You got to have that too. That's part of it. So, and as we've seen, Lane Kiffin, when he was offense coordinator at Alabama, he will pad stats. There were games where Alabama was up by a ton years ago, and they kept running Derrick Henry. And it's like, he's at 33 carries. What are you doing? And it was Lane trying to pad the stats to make him look gaudy so that, he could go on to win the Heisman. So, that's kind of the part of this thing. And, Nico Iamaleava over at Tennessee looked really good against Chattanooga. And I've been shocked by how many people have come out and started saying, that they think Nico could be a Heisman winner at the end of this year. I've seen Peter Burns say it. I've seen a lot of the national people starting to jump on board. So, that was interesting. And what I'll kind of put in here as a dark horse, the two guys I just mentioned were former LSU guys that won the Heisman. Garrett Nussmeier was really good in week 1 against USC in a loss. Let's see what he does as the year goes along, because Jaden Daniels won it last year with 3 losses, and it was because LSU's defense was so bad. If Garrett Nussmeier keeps playing like that and throws for 300, 400 yards a week and starts putting up some big touchdown totals as the year goes along, that's a guy that could be in the conversation, even with having lost the game in week 1. So, it'll be interesting. I hate that it's just a straight up quarterback, award now. I would even put Dylan Sampson there at Tennessee if he keeps having games like that every week. I mean, 124 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Maybe we're looking at the wrong Tennessee Vol as a Heisman guy, and maybe it's not Nico. Maybe it is Dylan Sampson if he keeps doing that. So, it's early. It's 1 week, but certainly fun to kind of look around and overreact to who could be in that Heisman running.
Do you think that a defensive player's got a chance to win the Heisman this year? I know Travis Hunter's kind of been in the mix, and I know a guy like James Pierce could potentially put himself into the mix as well.
Yeah, I mean, to do it defensively, and you're right. I mean, Travis Hunter being the playing both ways, I think helps him, obviously, and he's on a lot of people's radar. But it would take something gaudy. I mean, you'd have to do something ridiculous, and so I think, was it Kennard over at South Carolina? He's had 2.5 sacks. Dylan Stewart had a sack and a half. So, if those guys keep doing something like it would just take a special performance for you to far and away blow out some of the, records for sacks in a season or interceptions in a season, something like that for a defensive guy to do. So I don't know, man. I mean, look, Keon Sabb over at Alabama, he's tied for the nation's leader in interceptions with 2. If he finishes with like 20 on the season, maybe you say, hey, that's a guy that deserves it. But yeah, it's so hard for the defensive players. Like, you have to really do something special. I'll go back to Tyrann Mathieu at LSU. He was one that was putting up stupid numbers every week. But Travis Hunter's probably the best bet.
I think that with being a defensive player, you got to do more than just tackles and interceptions. You got to have pick sixes. You got to do something in the return game. And those 2 guys that you just mentioned, the last defensive player that won it in Charles Woodson, he was a return man, and he also played some offense as well. And Tyrann Mathieu, like we just mentioned, was also dominant in the return game as well. So, yeah, it would take something like that to happen. I think Travis Hunter has probably the best chance as on both sides of the football, like we already mentioned, to potentially win that Heisman because he brings that it factor to it as well. But at the end of the day, not only is it just how you perform on the field, it's also how just the overall team performs. Because if you're just a 4-8 team, it's very rare that you're going to get called up to New York for a Heisman Trophy vote, just because, nobody's really watching you on national TV. You're in a different landscape where voters are much more strict. And you know this, of course, you're a writer yourself. Who's really going to vote for somebody that's going to be on ESPNU half of the season and you're only on national TV maybe once if you're lucky?
Yeah. And you have to do something out of the ordinary to be special. It is the Heisman Trophy that goes to the best player in college football. And so to make the argument that you were the best player this year in college football, you got to be having an impact on the field and helping your team with wins and all that. But I just hate that it's become just so much a quarterback award. I wish, we could get some running backs, get some receivers. I know people had odds on Luther Burton, but it's like, what he's going to have to do as a wide receiver to get in that conversation. Like, he's going to have a ton of 300-yard games, to really make that impact.
Yeah, so you already mentioned about Nico Iamaleava, so let's just go ahead and talk about him. He's got a big matchup upcoming this Saturday at Bank of America going to North Carolina State. North Carolina State's coming off of a game where they gave up almost 400 yards of total offense. Their defense is still kind of suspect. Offense performed decent with Grayson McCall, but this is a completely different schedule that McCall is facing other than what he faced in the Sun Belt Conference. Is this an opportunity for Nico that he could pass for a bunch of yards against a struggling North Carolina State defense that did lose a lot of talent from last year's NFL draft?
Yeah, no doubt. And they've got so many good weapons now at Tennessee, pass catching weapons, wide receivers, probably the deepest wide receiver room they've had at Tennessee in quite a while. So you got that. You got a good run game with Sampson. The defense has improved. Yeah, this is a prove it game for Tennessee. It's a top 25 matchup against an NC State team who, like you mentioned, maybe not as good as they were a year ago, different pieces, but this is a statement game on a neutral field. You're going to have a nationally televised audience on ABC. So yeah, this is a great opportunity for Josh Heupel's team to go and prove themselves. I know they're sitting in close to a double-digit favorite. I think it's around 9.5, 10, depending on what sportsbook you're looking at. But again, that's a big prove it game for Tennessee to say, yes, we are for real. Yes, we're a team that we're going to compete for an SEC title this year. At minimum, we'll go 10-2, and we're going to make the college football playoff this year. And big reason why is our quarterback and Iamaleava. So we'll see what they can do. But man, on the flip side, if Tennessee loses this game, God, it just sends, it'll be like, we're not back. Nico does have a long way to go in his development. That's going to be the conversation that comes out of this. But I expect Tennessee to win, and I think we'll be, hyping them up a week from now, saying, yeah, this is a team that can absolutely still vie for the SEC crown. It's tough schedule. They still have to play some big dogs on the schedule, but I think it sets up pretty well for them this year.
Yeah, the spread for that game is about 7.5. I think Tennessee just comes out, and I think they blow the water out of North Carolina State. It's going to be close to start off, but I think whenever you get this offense into a groove, whenever you feed Dylan Sampson like you do, the variety of receivers that Nico Iamaleava can throw to, the way that this defense has been playing since the Iowa game last year, that they're on fire. They haven't given up a single point since close to the end of the regular season last year, and they're just going to continue to dominate. And Grayson McCall is going to have his success at some point, but that this Tennessee defense is just too good. That they're going to get after McCall, And I think it's going to be at least a 14, 15-point win for Tennessee going into this one. Do you think that if this is a Tennessee win, they deserve a spot in the top 10?
I mean, we'll see what the other teams around them do. I think they deserve to jump a spot or two. So, we'll see what they end up doing. But yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily jump to the top 10. It depends how it looks. If they blow them out of the water and it's a crooked number, then yeah, I think you do give Tennessee a lot of props and move them up into the top 10. But again, if teams ahead of them win and take care of business, keep in mind Texas plays Michigan, so one of those teams is going to drop a couple spots with a loss. So we'll see. But yeah, I think if Tennessee keeps taking care of their business, and they got a monster game coming up, at Oklahoma to open SEC play here in a couple weeks. I've been calling that's a must win for Tennessee. If they lose that game, I mean, could see that spiral of 3, 4-loss season. If they win that one, though, puts them in a prime spot. And even if they slip up against Georgia or somebody else, I think they're prime for, at least a 10-win season. So yeah, this is a big one. And, again, I expect Tennessee to take care of business. Will they? We'll find out.
Yeah, you are. Let's go on to another Heisman contender. You mentioned about Garrett Nussmeier earlier, and you alluded to the fact that he is a dark horse contender. I never really considered him to be a contender, honestly. But I think if he does get into a groove and he starts putting up those gaudy numbers, he showed a lot of promise against USC. But the thing about it is, when you looked at the fourth quarter, the play calling was so conservative. You got to let Garrett Nussmeier sling the rock around. You got to let him take the deep shots. You got to let him trust his receivers because he's got playmakers everywhere. Kyron Lacy didn't have a single reception or a single target in the second half after he had 4 just on the first drive alone. You have CJ Daniels, who's an elite receiver who's coming off of a 1,000-yard year with Liberty, showed promise during the first half, didn't really get his touches in the second. Same with Mason and Taylor. Do you think that you're going to see a lot more of that this upcoming weekend against what should be a blowout against Nichols?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those stat padding games for LSU to take care of their business, get themselves right, get their kinks figured out. I think kind of their downfall a week ago, it was one of the one of the storylines we didn't talk enough about this offseason, that LSU lost Mike Denbrock, their OC. Notre Dame came along and gave him a blank check and said, hey, you want to come back up here? And went up to Notre Dame as their OC. But obviously he was the one calling plays for Jaden Daniels last year when he won the Heisman. And, they had Joe Sloan on the staff. I think he was the quarterback's coach. They promote him to OC. And, he had been an OC at Louisiana Tech before, but this is big boy football. I mean, this is LSU and the SEC. And I thought, to your point, I thought the play calling wasn't great down the stretch in that game. And so they got to work out the kinks down these next couple weeks. They get Nichols. They do have a road trip at South Carolina. Can be a tough place to play. I expect LSU should, though, be the favored game. The team against South Carolina should take care of business against them. Then they come home to face UCLA. It doesn't look very good, but it still is a Power 4 program. And then they'll play South Alabama. I think there's a chance here for LSU to run off 4 wins in a row and then get ready for that big Ole Miss matchup on October 12th. The place, by the way, Ole Miss has not won since 2008. They have not won in Death Valley. So, real good chance here for LSU to start kind of getting themselves right, figure out the play calling, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, is Nussmeier, why did I mention him as a dark horse candidate? I mean, he's 4th in the SEC in passing yards right now after week 1. It's Jackson Dart, Peyton Thorne, which is the anomaly of all anomalies, Nico Iamaleava, Garrett Nussmeier, and Carson Beck. That's your top 5 passers in the SEC after week 1. And yeah, I expect Nuss is going to start adding, padding those stats and a lot more passing yards and touchdowns to that total with that slate they have the next 4 weeks.
Yeah, and the thing with Peyton Thorne being the second leading passer in the SEC, is that correct?
Yeah, passing yards, yeah.
It's unbelievable, and it's amazing how one recruiting cycle can really elevate your passing yard numbers. Because, I mean, he's a decent quarterback. I mean, he showed that at Michigan State, but I think last year he just was not comfortable getting into the SEC. And I think this year he's got a revamped receiver room. He's got 3 young freshmen coming in, and these dudes are good. These dudes are probably some of the best in the state of Alabama, and these dudes will probably be a difference maker for him for the rest of this year. And these dudes have a bright future ahead of them in the Hugh Freeze offensive system. Chris Gordy joining us here on SEC Unfiltered, the host of Locked On SEC. I want to give a shout out to our good friends over at MyBookie. Go on over to mybookie.ag and use code SECU at sign up to receive a special welcome offer on your first deposit. They are celebrating 10 years this year. MyBookie is, and according to them, the Heisman odds remain this: Dylan Gabriel is the plus 750 favorite, followed by Jackson Dart, Cam Ward, and Carson Beck. So a bit of a shakeup. Beck was the second leading with the best odds to win, but just a little bit of shakeup. Cam Ward really elevated himself, going from I think 10th to 15th all the way to third best odds. So going over to mybookie.com, SECU, to receive that special welcome offer. Speaking of betting, Chris, I know that we have a lot of gambling fans here on SEC Unfiltered. Who are you putting your money on right now after week 2 and after what you saw to win the Heisman Trophy? I know Shedeur had a big game. Cam Ward lit up Florida's secondary. We talked about Carson Beck. Dylan Gabriel, despite the score of 24-14, put up almost 500 yards passing. Who in your mind is probably going to be the favorite right now to win the Heisman Trophy, and who should we place our odds on at this moment?
Well, I don't know what the best odds are, but, look, I think Dart, like I mentioned earlier, I think he's going to be one that they're going to try to pad his stats as much as possible. It's Lane Kiffin, and again, if they lose their 2 toughest games, and they go 10-2 and they make the playoff, if he puts up monster numbers, and I think one of my bold predictions before the season was that Dart's going to throw for 4,000 yards this year. So, we'll see if he gets to that. I think Dart's got a great chance, but keep an eye on Jalen Milroe. I mean, he had a fantastic week 1 for Alabama. They went over Western Kentucky, threw for, he was 7-9 for 200 yards. Didn't really have to do much. Did throw the 3 touchdowns before he came out of the game. Ryan Williams, the 17-year-old freshman phenom, is just absolutely ridiculous. And so that was good to see. But, he added to 79 rushing yards as well to go with the 200 passing. So I think Milroe's got a great chance here. We saw how good Michael Penix was these last couple of years with Kalen DeBoer over at Washington. And Milroe is in a great spot to put up some great numbers. They play South Florida this weekend. They'll smash them. He'll put up big numbers, probably be benched by, second half again. And Milroe right now, to me, like if I had to place a bet on who I think is going to win it, I would say Jalen Milroe. But again, I put a bet on Jackson Dart, and again, long shot for good odds on Nico.
And we released our prize picks pick'em for the 12 SEC quarterbacks. Jackson Dart was only favored to have 2,850.5 yards. So if you want to say anything, that's easy money. Yeah. So this is a big, big, easy money maker. Here are the other ones. Carson Beck was the 33,250 passing yards. Brady Cook with 2,900. Jackson Arnold with 2,900. Quinn Ewers with 2,850. I mean, come on. This is easy money if you're a fan and you're betting on something like this. So last question for you, Chris, before we let you go, man. We know you got a big week ahead of you with week 2 set to be underway this Saturday. What's a sleeper game that we need to be watching in the SEC? We already mentioned Tennessee and North Carolina State, Texas and Michigan, South Carolina and Kentucky. That's a big one right there. What else do we need to watch out for in the SEC?
I like Arkansas and Oklahoma State. I think Arkansas's got a good chance to go in there and maybe pull off the upset. We're starting to see that line move a little bit. I know it was Arkansas was about 9 the other day. I think I saw it's down to 8 on one of the sports books I saw this morning. So, we'll see. I think Arkansas's got a chance to maybe keep this one close and maybe pull off the upset. If Taylor Green could go into Stillwater and be poised with Bobby Petrino calling the plays. I love Jaquindon Jackson, what we saw from him in the backfield as running back. And, I get it. They played a nobody in week 1, but it was the first time Arkansas's offense has looked really, really good and competent in quite a while and ran up the score and looked phenomenal in doing it. So I think Arkansas, as an underdog on the road to Oklahoma State, it's a game they're not supposed to win, but I think it's a game that they have a chance to. And maybe, just maybe, the natives start to get a little calmer on trying to run Sam Pittman out the door. Again, has it been a great showing the last couple of years? No, but this would be a huge feather in the cap, a huge early season win for Sam Pittman. And, I've said it all along. If he can get to 6-6, get to a bowl game, win it, it's not great, but at least it's an improvement from where they were, and I think is enough to save his job for another year and give some optimism for the future. But I think the key is Bobby Petrino and that play calling with Taylor Green. They've been awesome. Let's see if they can go do it on the road in a hostile environment.
And I think they have the opportunity to do that just with how Taylor Green performed last week and with how, I mean, come on, 10 possessions, 10 touchdowns, that's hard to do. It doesn't matter whether you're taking your foot off the gas or not. You're not going to see a lot of teams do that, especially in the SEC against a weaker opponent, but you just proved to the majority of college football that you can score and you have trust in Bobby Petrino and Taylor Green as your quarterback. And I think that that Oklahoma State should be on upset alert this upcoming weekend. I do think Arkansas does come out with the victory. Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC joining us here on SEC Unfiltered. Chris, where can we find you on all social media, and where can we look for you on Locked On SEC?
Yeah, on Twitter at Chris Gordy, and then Locked On SEC wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. And we're talking all things SEC. We love to have some guests on throughout the week to break down all the action, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, Locked On SEC.
Thank you, Chris, for coming on with us on SEC Unfiltered. We appreciate your time, man. Let's have a great start to week 2, and we'll chop it up real soon, brother.
Awesome. Thanks, dude.